Greetings, podcast listeners. In this episode of History from One Student to Another, which is rewritten, reproduced, and recorded as a part of my IGCSE series on Weimar Germany, I will be discussing the early political and economic crisis of the new Weimar Republic. The formation of the Weimar Republic began at the end of the Second World War in 1918. It started with the German Revolution of 1918, which began at the port city of Kiel. By the autumn of 1918, it had become clear that Germany had no chance of winning the First World War, so when they were ordered to go on a suicide mission and attack the British Navy, the German soldiers committed mutiny and refused to go out to sea. This act of protest sparked rebellions across Germany, and the German Revolution became a national goal. The German people, the German army, Prince Max, the Allies, who threatened to invade Germany, all demanded that the Kaiser abdicate and Germany become a socialist republic. From the Kiel Mutiny on the 3rd of November to Kaiser Wilhelm's abdication on the 9th of November, the German government collapsed under the threats of the German citizens, who rebelled across the country, with citizens marching into the Berlin city centre and protesting against the Kaiser's government. Following the pressure, Prince Max announced that the Kaiser would abdicate and that he would be taken to neutral Holland to spend the rest of his life in exile. This paved the way for Friedrich Ebert, leader of the Social Democratic Party, to become Chancellor of Germany and for the new socialist government called the Weimar government to be formed. The first act of the Weimar government was the signing of the despised Treaty of Versailles in the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles, France. With the change of the new government, a new constitution was drafted, with the key idea of democratic representation and a government that gave power to all German adults. While the new constitution arguably had many strengths, it also had a number of weaknesses. Whilst the new Weimar government was democratic and citizens had freedom and choice, as both men and women aged 20 or above could vote and choose their president, a flaw of the constitution was that the president could use Article 48 to declare a situation an emergency and pass new laws without consulting the Reichstag. This meant he could effectively turn himself into a dictator. Another strength is that as a constitution, the Weimar government made it clear how the country was meant to be governed. However, as a socialist republic and the government that had signed the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar Republic had many enemies who hated and wanted to destroy it. The third and final strength that I would like to draw upon is the Reichstag, the German parliament in charge of lawmaking in Germany, which was elected by the German people. The Reichstag was determined by proportional representation, an electoral system which meant that the higher the percentage of votes a political party received from the German public, the more seats they would receive in the Reichstag. The Weimar government also had a chancellor, who was appointed by the president. However, he also had to have support from the majority of politicians in the Reichstag. Effectively, this meant that the people were in charge of choosing who governed their country. However, a key weakness is that proportional representation meant the Reichstag often had disagreements and conflicting points of view, because it meant that it was very difficult for a single party to gain a majority. Therefore, the largest party often had to form a coalition government with the support of other political parties, and these different parties within the coalition governments often disagreed with each other and failed to cooperate. Faced with opposition from all sides, the leading party of Weimar Germany was faced with numerous political crises. The Spartacist Uprising was a communist uprising that took place from January 5th to January 12th, 1919, with the aim of overthrowing the Weimar government, and the communists setting up a government like the one in Russia. In response to the uprising, the government asked a group of ex-soldiers called the Freikorps, who hated the Weimar Republic, to crush the uprising. Although they were loyal to the Kaiser, they helped the government to crush the uprising as they were heavily anti-communist. Aside from the 150 deaths in Berlin and the 400 killed if the suppression of the other communist revolts in places like Bavaria are included, most problematically for the Republic, the leaders of the Spartacists, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, were found murdered. This created an issue for the government as they had to decide whether to keep the Freikorps happy and ignore the murders, as it was possible they were responsible for them, or to investigate and arrest those responsible so that justice would be served. In the end, the Weimar government made the decision of setting up an investigation and asking the police to arrest those responsible for the murders. 4 months later, on the 1st of June 1919, Luxemburg's corpse was found, and Otto Runge, who knocked out Luxemburg and Liebknecht, was sentenced to 2 years in prison for attempted manslaughter, and Lieutenant Vogel, who may have shot Luxemburg, to 4 months for failing to report a corpse. Vogel was able to escape to Switzerland before serving any significant amount of time. Another political crisis arose when the terms of the Treaty of Versailles were announced by the Allies in June of 1919. The harsh terms horrified the German people, and German politicians complained to the Allies and tried to persuade them to change some of its most harsh terms, arguing that the war was the Kaiser's fault, not the Weimar government's. The terms of the treaty largely had three main purposes. Firstly, with the purpose of punishing and humiliating Germany, Germany had to accept the blame for starting the war according to the War Guilt Clause. A plebiscite was to be held in North Danzig so the people could decide to be part of Germany or Denmark. Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia were to become independent, and Germany's colonies had to be ruled by France, Britain and other member countries on behalf of the newly established League of Nations. Secondly, with the purpose of weakening Germany, it had to reduce its army to just 100,000 men. It could only have 6 battleships in its navy, and could not build or use aeroplanes, submarines or tanks. It must not join with Austria, whom they had been allies with in World War I and shared the same mother language of German. It had to demilitarize the Rhineland, an area on the German-French border which was to be occupied by Allied troops for the next 15 years, and the industrial coal mining area called Saarland was to be governed by the League of Nations for 15 years, and the coal fields were to be run by France, meaning that France would get all the coal that was mined there. Thirdly, in order to reward or compensate the Allies, Germany had to pay reparations to them who had won the war, with the sum initially a blank cheque until it was later set at £6.6 million or 36 billion German marks. Alsace-Lorraine, which Germany had won in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, had to be returned to France. Ypres and Malmedy were given to Belgium, who had been allies of France and Britain in the war. The Polish corridor was given to Poland, so they were no longer landlocked, cutting off East Prussia from the rest of Germany. Danzig was to be governed as a free city by the League of Nations, so Poland could trade easily, and the industrial coal mining area called Saarland was to be governed by the League of Nations for 15 years, and the coal fields were to be run by France, meaning that France would get all the coal that was mined there. I think it's clear why the German people would hate the Treaty of Versailles, but I want to go over a few reasons as an example for you all. One of the reasons why the German people hated the Treaty of Versailles is that one of the terms required them to reduce their army to just 100,000 men. They hated this because their formerly expansive, well-trained and well-equipped army was not only a source of national pride, but if attacked, they would no longer be able to defend themselves with just 100,000 men. Secondly, Germany had not been invited to join the peace negotiations. Therefore, many Germans felt that the terms of the treaty had been forced upon them. They called the treaty a diktat, or dictated peace. Finally, many countries other than Germany had been building up their armed forces and threatening to invade other countries before the beginning of World War I. Therefore, Germans felt angry that they had to accept all the blame for the war, as other countries had also played a part in causing the conflict. The Treaty of Versailles itself caused another political crisis to arise in March of 1920, the Kapp Putsch. It was a right-wing movement sparked by the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, organised by the Freikorps, who blamed the Weimar government, who were Social Democrats, for signing the treaty and believed that they had betrayed the Kaiser and the army. As the Freikorps, who hated the Weimar government, were becoming a very powerful force in Germany, the Allies called on President Hebert to break them up. When the Freikorps refused to disband, their leader, Wolfgang Kapp, attempted to lead the Freikorps to overthrow the government with the aim of setting up a nationalist government. The Freikorps, with the support of some of the German army, including General Ludendorff, took over buildings in Berlin, and President Hebert decided to call on the army to stop the Freikorps. As many of the soldiers in the army had fought alongside the Freikorps, they refused to fight, and President Hebert was forced to call on the workers in Berlin to go on strike and to not cooperate with the Freikorps. In the end, the Freikorps were forced to retreat. However, the Kapp Putsch is good evidence that many right-wing groups hated the new socialist government. Another crisis, which can be seen as both economic and political, was the French invasion of the Ruhr. It took place from the 11th of January 1923 to the 25th of August 1925, where French soldiers invaded and occupied the German industrial area of the Ruhr after the Weimar government was unable to pay the reparations. Hence, the French began to take coal, machinery and other resources from the Ruhr instead. In response, the Weimar government decided to call on the workers in the Ruhr to go on strike with the aim of resisting the French occupation. Although the French had left the Ruhr, there was still a problem. The government had printed much more money between March and November of 1923 as they needed to pay the striking workers. This led to hyperinflation, which means the German currency became almost worthless, and many people lost their savings and the price of goods increased. To solve the problem of hyperinflation, the Weimar government and the US government agreed on the Dawes Plan, where the USA would loan them money, which they could use to pay their reparations and invest in the German economy. Subsequently, the Weimar government decided to scrap the old currency and introduce a new one, which was called the Rentenmark. They then knocked off the noughts and strictly limited the amount of new currency that could be printed before a new one was introduced. I will speak more about the Dawes Plan in the next episode, but for now, this is the end of this episode of my podcast. Please click subscribe or follow to be notified when the next episode of History from One Student to Another is released. You can leave me feedback via the Google form in the description or contact me via the social media links. Bye-bye!